Our house was not a home, it was a fortress built on a foundation of scripture and fear. And the enemy, my father proclaimed every single day, was the entire world outside our door. It was a world of sin, of temptation, of godless distraction, and our family was the last bastion of purity in a fallen land. My father was a man who saw the world in stark black and white, in God and the devil, with no room for shades of gray in between. He used to hold up his worn, black leather Bible in one hand and point a trembling, accusatory finger at my small stack of school books with the other. "This is the only truth you will ever need, Sarah," he would thunder, his voice echoing in our sparse, unadorned living room. "In here," he'd say, tapping the Bible, "is the Word of God, eternal and unchanging. Out there," he'd continue, his gaze sweeping over my textbooks with contempt, "is the devil's tempting whisper, the poison of so-called knowledge designed to lead your soul to damnation." He never knew that for a girl who was starving in a desert of rigid faith, the devil's whisper sounded a lot like hope. He never knew that in his war against the world, he was turning his own house into the battlefield and his own daughter into a secret willing traitor. Good day to all of you, my dear friends. My name is Sarah, and I am 76 years old. I am speaking to you today from my laboratory at a small university on the West Coast, where I am a professor emeritus of botany. It's a bit of a fancy title for a woman who is happiest with her hands in the dirt. As you can see, I am surrounded by life in its most stubborn and fascinating forms. This greenhouse is my sanctuary, filled with the humid, earthy scent of living things. My specialty is a field some people find strange. I study extremophiles. These are the tiny, miraculous organisms, lichens, algae, mosses that survive and even thrive in the most hostile environments on Earth. They grow on volcanic rock, in the crushing pressures of the deep sea, and in the frozen, windswept deserts of Antarctica. I have spent my life searching for life in places where everyone else said it couldn't possibly exist. I suppose, in a way, I have been studying myself all along. I, too, am a child of a barren rock, a survivor of a place where joy was not supposed to grow, and I am here to tell you that life is more resilient than you could ever imagine. It brings me such a deep sense of peace to know that you are here, sharing this space with me. It reminds me that we are all part of the same vast, interconnected ecosystem. Could you take a moment to tell me in the comments where you are watching from today? And was there ever a forbidden book or a secret subject in your own childhood that you just couldn't resist exploring? The pursuit of knowledge is such a powerful human drive. I would love to hear your stories. And if the work we are doing here, the work of unearthing these resilient life stories, feels important to you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support is like sunlight and water. It helps these stories to grow and reach even further. My story begins in an isolated valley in rural Appalachia, a place forgotten by the main roads and the march of time. Our community, which my father called the Flock, consisted of 5 families who had followed him there to escape the perceived wickedness of the modern world. We lived a life of extreme, deliberate austerity. Our house was a simple, unpainted wooden structure, scrubbed clean but devoid of any comfort or beauty. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no pictures on the walls. Such things, my father taught, were vanities, snares laid by Satan to distract us from the contemplation of God. Our clothes were plain and drab, long, gray dresses for the women, simple dark trousers and shirts for the men. Color was a sin. Music, other than the droning, mournful hymns we sang on Sundays, was the devil's rhythm. Laughter was a sign of a frivolous soul. My father, Pastor Elias, was the absolute, unquestioned patriarch of our small world. He was a tall, imposing man with fiery eyes and a voice that could make the window panes rattle when he preached about hellfire and damnation. He was not a con artist or a hypocrite. That would have been easier to bear. He was a true believer. He had created his own rigid, unforgiving version of Christianity, and he ruled our lives by its ironclad laws. His word was God's word, and to question him was to question the Almighty himself. My mother, Hannah, was his most devout follower. She was a quiet, gentle woman who had long ago sublimated her own will to his. She loved me, I know she did, but she saw my father's crushing strictness as a form of divine love, a necessary discipline to keep my soul pure and safe from the temptations of the world that lay just beyond our valley. She was a kind jailer, one who truly believed the prison she kept was for my own good. Life was a relentless, monotonous cycle of chores, prayer, and scripture. From the moment the sun rose until we fell into our simple beds at night, our days were filled with work and worship. My childhood was a void where normal joys were supposed to be. Birthdays were not celebrated with parties or cake, but with a special prayer of thanks for another year of life spared from sin, and perhaps a new Bible as a gift. I remember once, when I was 7, I found a brilliant blue jay's feather in the woods. I was mesmerized by its iridescent color, a jewel against the gray backdrop of my world. I brought it home, a secret treasure. My father found it. He didn't yell. He did something far worse. He took me outside, held the feather up to the light, and explained how my fascination with this object was a form of idolatry, a love of worldly beauty that was an affront to God. He then dropped the feather into the fire of our wood stove and made me watch as the beautiful color curled into black ash. That was the day I learned that beauty was a sin. The greatest trial of my young life was school. By state law, I was required to attend the public school in the nearest town, a place my father called the Devil's Recruiting Station. It was a 20-mile bus ride each way. I was allowed to go for one reason only, to learn the basic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic, so I could better study the Bible. I was under strict orders. I was not to make friends with the other children, who he called the worldly. I was not to participate in any after-school activities. I was not to read any books that were not on a short, pre-approved list. I was to be a ghost in the halls of education, absorbing only what was necessary and remaining untouched by its sinful influence. But my father had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the power of a library. The school library was... My secret intellectual rebellion escalated when I was 14. I discovered the science section. I pulled a book from the shelf with a simple, intriguing title, Cosmos. I opened it, and my world tilted on its axis. I read about stars that were not just decorative lights in the sky, but massive burning suns millions of light years away. I read about galaxies, nebulae, and the mind-boggling scale of the universe. I learned about the laws of physics, the steady, reliable principles that governed everything from a falling apple to the orbit of the planets. The book presented a universe that was not governed by the whims of a capricious, angry God, but by a set of beautiful, elegant, and understandable rules. It was the most profound and liberating story I had ever read. It was a direct contradiction to everything my father taught, and I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me that it was true. I became a secret scholar of the forbidden. I devoured books on biology, chemistry, geology, and astronomy. I learned about the slow, patient story of evolution, a story so much more grand and awe-inspiring than the 6-day creation tale I was taught at home. I was living a life of profound cognitive dissonance. At home, I was the quiet, obedient daughter, nodding along to my father's sermons about the literal truth of Genesis. At school, I was secretly filling my mind with the evidence-based wonders of the scientific world. I knew I was playing with fire, the very hellfire my father so often preached about. The risk was enormous, but the reward, the quiet, powerful thrill of understanding, was irresistible. The inevitable confrontation came when I was 16. My intellectual curiosity had finally outweighed my caution. There was a book I couldn't bear to leave at school. It was an old, well-worn copy of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. I knew it was the ultimate heresy, the very scripture of the devil's gospel according to my father, but I had to have it. I smuggled it home, hidden in the false bottom of my book bag, my heart hammering with each step. That night, I read it under my covers by the light of a small stolen flashlight, my world expanding with each turn of the page. The next afternoon, while I was outside doing chores, my father decided to conduct one of his random purity inspections of my room. He was searching for any sign of worldly contamination, a hidden doodle, a colorful ribbon, a note from a classmate. What he found was far worse. He found Darwin. I came inside to find him standing in the middle of my small, bare room. He was holding the book in one hand, his knuckles white. He was not yelling. He was unnervingly calm, which was always so much worse. The air in the room was electric, heavy with a sense of impending doom. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a righteous fury that was terrifying to behold. "I warned you, Sarah," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I warned you about the devil's whispers. It seems you have not only been listening to them, you have invited him into our home." He held up the book as if it were a venomous snake, the ultimate symbol of knowledge, of reason, of the world outside his fortress, had breached the walls, and I knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that my life was about to be changed forever. The confrontation was not a simple scolding, it was a formal tribunal for my soul. My father did not yell. His rage was a cold, righteous fire, far more terrifying than any simple anger. He convened a S.A. "Sarah," my father began, his voice a low, resonant boom that filled the silent room. "You have brought a serpent into this house of God. You have allowed the lies of a godless man, a man who claims we are descended from apes, to poison your mind." He picked up the Darwin book with 2 fingers as if it were physically unclean. "This is not a book. This is a testament to the arrogance of man, a rebellion against the divine truth of creation. You have chosen this filth, over the holy word of your Creator. Have you anything to say in your defense?" What could I say? How could I explain the profound, elegant beauty of natural selection to a man who saw the world as a 6,000-year-old magic trick? How could I describe the wonder of a billion-year-old universe to people who believed the stars were just decorations poked into the ceiling of the sky? I remained silent. My silence was taken as an admission of guilt. The punishment was swift and absolute, designed not just to correct my behavior but to surgically remove the cancer of curiosity from my soul. First came the book burning. It was a ritual. My father led our small congregation outside to the fire pit. He made me hold the book as he recited verses about casting out idols and false prophets. Then he took it from my hands and tossed it into the flames. I watched as the cover curled, the pages blackened and turned to ash, the ideas of a genius dissolving into smoke and disappearing into the uncaring Appalachian night. The symbolism was clear. This is what we do to forbidden knowledge. We destroy it. Second comma. My connection to the outside world was severed completely. "Your mind has been corrupted by the worldly education system," my father declared. "You will not return to that school." My heart plummeted. The library, my only sanctuary, was gone. My formal education was over. From now on, he announced It was during this period of exile that I met Daniel. His family owned the farm in the next valley over, a place that, to me, might as well have been on the other side of the moon. They were not part of the flock. They were the worldly, people my father warned us against, but they were also the only ones with a large enough grain mill, so once a month, Daniel would drive their old pickup truck down our dirt road to deliver sacks of flour and cornmeal. He was 18, 2 years older than me, with a quiet smile and kind, steady eyes. I would see him from a distance while I worked in the garden. Our first interactions were nothing more than a shared glance across the yard. In my world, this was as scandalous as a love affair. A look from an outsider, a boy, was a forbidden thing. He seemed to sense my isolation. He began to leave small gifts for me. It started simply. 1 month after he had gone, I found a perfect ripe apple sitting on a fence post near where I worked. It was a variety we didn't grow, sweet and crisp. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. The next month, it was a small bundle of wildflowers tied with a piece of twine. I hid them in the barn, visiting them in secret, their vibrant color a shocking, beautiful sin in my gray world. Then he took the biggest risk of all. He understood, with an intuition that still astounds me, that what I craved most was not food or flowers, but knowledge. One delivery day, I saw him walk towards the old, hollowed-out oak tree that marked the edge of our property. After his truck had rumbled away, I crept over to the tree. Tucked inside the hollow was a book. It was a slim volume of poetry by Robert Frost. I devoured it in a single night, the words painting pictures of a world of choices, of roads not taken, of snowy woods and promises to keep. It was a different kind of knowledge, not of facts, but of fee. To hear someone from the outside validate my own secret feelings, to confirm that my life was not normal, not right, was like a cool drink of water in the desert. A tentative, fragile friendship grew, a green shoot pushing its way up through the barren rock of my existence. It was a friendship that was blossoming into something more, a dangerous, unspoken affection. But we were playing with fire. My father's vigilance was absolute. He began to notice a change in me, a subtle shift from sullen obedience to a quiet, secretive contentment. He saw a light in my eyes that he hadn't seen before, and he was suspicious. The near disaster happened on a bright October afternoon. Daniel and I were at our meeting spot by the hollow tree. He had just given me a new book, a high school biology textbook he had saved for me. We were talking, standing a little too close, our heads bent over a diagram of a cell. The world had shrunk to just the two of us and the rustle of the autumn leaves. We didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. I looked up and saw my father standing at the edge of the woods, not 50 yards away, his face a mask of thunderous fury. For a heart-stopping second, our eyes met. Daniel grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the massive trunk of the oak tree. We flattened ourselves against the bark, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. We heard him walking closer, the snap of twigs under his heavy boots. I held my breath, certain we were caught, certain that a terrible, violent judgment was about to be unleashed, not just on me, but on this kind boy who had done nothing but show me a moment of freedom. He stopped, just yards from our hiding place. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, for some reason I will never understand, he turned and walked back towards the house. We waited until he was long gone, our bodies trembling with adrenaline and fee. The terror of that near discovery was a physical thing. For days, I lived in a state of suspended dread, expecting my father's heavy footsteps at my door at any moment, the final judgment in his eyes. Every rustle of leaves, every unexpected sound sent a jolt of panic through me. I was certain he knew. I was certain he was just waiting, watching me, letting the fear build before he brought down his righteous hammer. I knew, with a certainty that felt like a death sentence, that I had to protect Daniel. He had risked everything for me, and I could not be the cause of his ruin. The next time he was due to make a delivery, I left a note for him in the hollow of our old oak tree. It was the hardest note I have ever had to write. "It's too dangerous," I wrote on a scrap of paper. He saw us. "You can't come back. Don't leave any more books. Please, for your own safety, forget about me. Goodbye, Sarah." I felt like I was cutting off my own arm, severing my only connection to life, but it was a sacrifice I had to make. For a week, I lived in a gray, silent misery, my brief season of hope now over. I did my chores, I read my Bible, and I kept my eyes on the ground, a perfect portrait of a penitent daughter. I avoided the woods, I avoided the edge of our property, I avoided the hollow tree. Then, one afternoon while I was feeding the chickens, I heard a soft whistle from the woods, a prearranged signal we had used only once before. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Daniel. I looked around frantically. My father was in the barn, my mother was in the house. I slipped into the cover of the trees, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a wild, irrepressible joy that he was waiting for me, his face grim but resolute. "I got your note," he said, his voice low. "I'm not leaving, Sarah." "You have to," I whispered urgently. "He'll destroy you. You don't know what he's like." "I don't care," he said, and the simple, steady conviction in his eyes was the bravest thing I had ever seen. "I'm not going to leave you here in this prison. I've been thinking about it ever since that day, worrying about you. And I realized your note was wrong. The answer isn't for me to go away. The answer is for us to go away, together." The idea was so audacious, so impossible, it took my breath away. Escape was a vague, distant dream I had nursed in secret. Daniel was making it a plan, a real, tangible thing. "How?" I asked, the word full of all my fear and hopelessness. "We'll figure it out," he said, taking my hand. "We'll be smart, we'll be patient, but we will get you out of here, I promise you." In that moment, our relationship transformed. We were no longer just a boy and a girl sharing secret books. We were co-conspirators, partners in the most dangerous and important undertaking of our lives. Our secret meetings became strategy sessions. Daniel became my window to the world, a one-man intelligence agency. He brought me bus schedules he'd picked up from the station in town, old road maps, and newspapers from cities like Philadelphia and Richmond. For the first time, the world outside my valley began to take on a real shape. I would study the maps for hours, memorizing the names of highways and towns, charting potential routes. I read the classified ads in the newspapers, learning what kinds of jobs were available, how much a room for rent might cost. I was no longer a dreamer, I was a strategist. But one enormous, insurmountable obstacle stood in our way: money. Daniel saved every penny he could from his work on his family's farm, but it was a slow, painstaking process. I had nothing. I had never held a dollar bill that was my own. The solution, when it came to me, was born from the very prison in which I lived. My father had taken my books, but he had left me the valley. And in my secret studies of the natural world, I had learned that the forest floor was not just a collection of weeds, it was a treasure chest. I knew from a botany book I had read long ago that the Appalachian Mountains were home to wild American ginseng, a root so valuable that traders paid a fortune for it. To my father and the flock, it was just another plant. To me, it was the key to my freedom. I began my secret second life as a forager. It was dangerous work. I had to venture deeper into the woods than I was ever allowed, always listening for the sound of my father's approach. I learned to identify the plant's distinctive 5-pronged leaves, to carefully dig up the gnarled, human-shaped root, and to hide my harvest in a burlap sack tucked into a hollow log. I also gathered other valuable herbs I had learned to recognize: black cohosh, golden seal, plants the outside world paid for in tinctures and remedies. Daniel became my connection to the market. On his delivery days, I would pass him my sack of carefully cleaned and dried roots. He would take them to an apothecary in a town 50 miles away, a place where no one would ask any questions. The first time he came back and pressed a wad of cash into my hand, $37, a staggering fortune, I felt a jolt of power that was more intoxicating than any forbidden knowledge. It was the first money I had ever earned. It was mine. It was the tangible result of my own skill and courage. Our escape fund, hidden in a tin box and buried near the hollow tree, began to grow. Our bond, forged in shared secrecy and mutual risk, deepened into a quiet, profound love. Our whispered meetings were no longer just about logistics, they were about a future. We would talk about the life we wanted to build together, a simple life in a place where we could be free. A place with a library, a small plot of land for a garden, a home where music and laughter were not considered sins. These shared dreams were the fuel that kept us going through the long, frightening months of planning. We were two lonely souls who had found each other on the border between two worlds, and we were determined to build a new world of our own. We had been planning for nearly a year. I was about to turn 18. Our fund had grown to almost $300. We were getting close, planning our departure for the spring, when my father, in his infinite, terrible wisdom, decided to secure my future and my soul permanently. He had always been vigilant, but as I had blossomed into a young woman, his vigilance had taken on a new, unsettling edge. He saw my growing independence not as maturity, but as a dangerous drift towards the temptations of the flesh. His solution was to anchor me with the unbreakable chain of marriage. He would not, of course, allow me to marry an outsider. A husband had to be a man of God, a man from within our own flock, a man who would continue my spiritual education and ensure my unwavering obedience. He chose a young man named Micah, the son of another elder in our community. Micah was 20, a true believer with cold, pious eyes and a rigid, unforgiving view of the world. He was my father's prized pupil, a boy who had completely absorbed every ounce of his dogma. He looked at me, not with affection, but with the grim determination of a zookeeper tasked with taming a wild animal. I found him terrifying. My father announced our betrothal one evening after prayers as if he were announcing the week's work schedule. It was not a proposal or a discussion, it was a divine decree. "Sarah," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "it is time for you to become a wife and begin your duties as a woman. You will be married to Micah. The wedding will be in 2 weeks, on the first Sunday of the month." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, a life sentence. I was being handed from one jailer to another, a man who would be even more zealous in his mission to crush my spirit. The room began to spin. I looked at my mother, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. She just looked due. Own at her hands, her face a mask of resigned piety. This was God's will, and there was no appealing a verdict from God. All of our careful, patient planning, our saving, our dreaming, it was all about to be rendered useless. The future I had so painstakingly begun to build with Daniel was about to be obliterated. I had to warn him. That night, I feigned a sickness in my stomach and went to the outhouse. From there, I slipped into the darkness and ran, my bare feet flying over the cold ground, my breath catching in ragged sobs. I ran to our hollow tree, my heart shattering with every step. I gave our signal, a desperate, frantic whistle into the night. I prayed he would hear me. I waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I saw the flicker of his lantern approaching through the trees. He saw my face, streaked with tears, and knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with alarm. "He's marrying me off," I choked out, the words tasting like poison. "To Micah, in 2 weeks." I watched the color drain from Daniel's face. He stood there for a moment, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows, the terrible finality of my father's decision sinking in. He looked at me, at my terrified, pleading eyes, and all the gentleness in his face hardened into a grim, unshakable resolve. He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and steady. The time for patience, for careful planning, was over. My father had forced our hand. "No," Daniel said, his voice low and certain. "He's not. Pack whatever you can carry. Meet me back here in 1 hour." He looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective love. "The wedding is not in 2 weeks. We leave tonight." Daniel's words, "We leave tonight on Sao Ai Shui," were not a suggestion, they were a lifeline, and I grabbed hold with all the strength I had left. The hour that followed was a blur of frantic, silent terror. I ran back to the house, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. The house was dark and still, the breathing of my parents and the other members of the flock the only sound. I slipped into my room, a ghost in my own home for the last time. I did not pack clothes or sentimental trinkets. My past was not something I wished to carry with me. Instead, I gathered the tools of my future. I took the tin box of money, our hard-won $300. I took my secret notes on the flora of the valley, the careful drawings and scientific names I had scribbled on scraps of paper, and I took the one book Daniel had given me that I hadn't yet returned, my beloved copy of Robert Frost's poems. These were the only things I owned that represented a life of my own choosing. With my small bundle clutched to my chest, I slipped out the back door, melting into the familiar darkness of the woods without a sound, without a note, without a single look back. Daniel was waiting, a single small satchel at his feet. Seeing him there, steady and certain in the moonlight, was the only courage I needed. We didn't speak. We just took each other's hand and ran. We ran through the dark woods, our feet sure on the paths we had both known since childhood. We ran from the fortress of faith, from the cold piety of Micah, from the thunderous rage of my father's God. We ran towards a world we couldn't imagine, armed with nothing but a pocket full of cash and a desperate shared hope for a life where we could simply be ourselves. We reached the main road, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the mountains, and hid in the ditch to wait for the 4 a.m. Greyhound bus, the one we knew from Daniel's schedules, would take us east, away from the valley, away from that life, forever. When the bus finally appeared, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, it felt like a chariot from another world. We paid the driver in cash for 2 tickets to the farthest city we could afford, Philadelphia. As I climbed the steps onto the bus, I felt the invisible chains that had bound me for 18 years fall away. The arrival in Philadelphia was a glorious, terrifying assault on the senses. After a lifetime of enforced silence and drab colors, the city was an explosion of life. The roar of traffic, the kaleidoscope of different faces, the vibrant colors of the clothing, the smells of street vendors, it was overwhelming and utterly exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I did not have to avert my eyes or shrink into myself. I was just another anonymous face in the crowd, and the feeling was intoxicating. The first months were brutally hard. We were 2 young people with no connections, no references, and a background that was impossible to explain. We found a tiny, grim apartment with a single window that looked onto an air shaft. Daniel, strong and tireless, found backbreaking work on a construction site. I, with my strange, stunted education, took the only job I could get, cleaning hotel rooms at night. It was grueling, lonely work, scrubbing the remnants of other people's lives, but it was honest and it was mine. We were poor, we were exhausted, but we were free. Our sanctuary once again was the library, but this time it was not a secret. We would spend our one day off a week at the Free Library of Philadelphia, a magnificent palace of knowledge. I read with a desperate hunger, filling in the vast gaps in my education. And it was through the library that I found my path. It was connected to the University of Pennsylvania, and I began to wander the campus, drawn by an irresistible force. I started slipping into the back of large, crowded lecture halls, a ghost in the halls of a different kind of institution. I audited classes in biology, chemistry, and botany, my mind soaking up the information like a parched desert, drinking in the rain. It was in a botany lecture that my life changed again. The professor, a kind elderly man named Dr. Abramson, noticed the intense, shabbily dressed young woman who sat in the back row of every single one of his lectures but was not on his roster. One day, he stopped me as I was leaving. He asked me my name, and with a mix of fear and defiance, I told him my story, not all of it, but enough. I told him I had come from an isolated community with no formal schooling beyond the age of 16 and that I was trying to teach myself. He listened with a gentle, patient curiosity. Then he began to ask me questions not about my past, but about plants. I answered, drawing on the secret knowledge I had gained in the valley, naming species, describing their uses and habitats. He was astounded. "My dear girl," he said, his eyes wide with surprise, "you have more practical botanical knowledge than half of my graduate students. You have a gift. It would be a crime to let it go to waste." Dr. Abramson became my champion. He helped me study for the high school equivalency exam, which I passed with flying colors. He arranged a job for me working in the university's sprawling greenhouses, a place that felt more like heaven than any church I had ever known, and he helped me apply for a special scholarship for non-traditional students. A year later, at the age of 20, I walked onto the University of Pennsylvania campus not as a ghost, but as a full-time undergraduate student of botany. The years that followed were a whirlwind of growth and discovery. Daniel and I married in a simple ceremony at a courthouse with Dr. Abramson and his wife as our witnesses. Our life was no longer about a desperate scramble for survival, it was about building. Daniel, with his practical skills and strong work ethic, started his own successful landscaping company, shaping the earth in his own way. I thrived at the university. My unique background, my intimate knowledge of how plants survived in the harsh conditions of my valley gave me a unique perspective. I received my doctorate and eventually became a professor myself, dedicating my research to the very thing that had saved me: the incredible, stubborn resilience of life in the most unforgiving of environments. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and we raised them in a house that was the exact opposite of the one I had known. Our home was filled with color, with music, with raucous laughter, and above all, with books. Every book was welcome, every question was encouraged. We taught them not what to think, but how to think, the greatest gift my father had inadvertently given me by making me fight so hard for it, and the great secret I kept for 50 years. My husband, my children, my colleagues, they all know I came from a very strict, isolated religious background. They know I was denied a formal education, but they do not know the full, suffocating horror of it. They do not know about the book burnings, the 40 days of fasting, the trial for my soul. They do not know the name Micah or the terror of a forced marriage. That is the secret I kept. Not to deceive them, but to protect them. That dark, airless valley is my history, but it is not their legacy. My father's final con was his belief that he could own my soul. The truth, which I discovered in a forbidden book and proved with my own life, is that no one can. My dear friends, that is my story. It is a testament to the fact that knowledge is not a sin. It is the key that unlocks the prison door. And that life, even when it is planted in the most barren, unforgiving rock, will always find a way to grow towards the light. If this story about finding freedom through knowledge has inspired you, I would be honored if you would subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it. There are so many people, young and old, who feel trapped in a world that tells them not to question, not to learn. If this story about escaping a restrictive upbringing resonated with you, I invite you to explore our playlist on stories of liberation, which is linked in the description below. In the comments, please leave the word growth so I know you have stood with me in this garden of resilience. Always remember, your mind is your own sacred ground. Let nothing stop you from cultivating it. Thank you for listening.